Join me, 48 Hours correspondent Erin Moriarty, on my podcast, My Life of Crime, as I take on true crime investigations like no other. This season, I'm looking into the labyrinth of crime and secrets within families. I'm cutting straight to the evidence and talking to the people directly involved, including investigators and the families of victims. Listen to My Life of Crime with Erin Moriarty wherever you get your podcasts.
Inspired by the life of the savvy and ambitious Colombian businesswoman Griselda Blanco comes a new Netflix original limited series. Griselda tells the story of a devoted mother who, with her lethal blend of charm and relentless savagery, creates one of the most powerful cartels in history. Witness Sofia Vergara's captivating transformation into the godmother of the underworld. Griselda, streaming January 25th, only on Netflix.
A note to listeners. The following podcast contains content that may not be suitable for all audiences.
Their prime hunting ground was the Sunset Strip, where they would pick up working girls, some runaways, and they would, get them in the car for sexual purposes and kill them. But one of his biggest manipulation tactics, I will say, is how he would talk. And you guys got to see this firsthand, is like he would just go and go and go and kind of throw out all this information at you. And you're kind of like, you can't even keep up with what he's telling you. And I think a lot of people go along with that, is like, he seems like he really knows what he's talking about, so you don't question it. But really, it's a manipulation tactic. Well, I always say these guys are predators, so they might be faking an illness. They might be looking like very frail and weak, but they're ready to pounce. And I think they use that just to draw people in, to put their guard down, even in their old age.
You are listening to Partners in True Crime. We are your hosts, Rob and Cindy Dorfman.
Nine years ago, Laura Brand met Douglas Clark inside San Quentin's death row. Clark and his partner, Carol Bundy, were infamously known as the Sunset Strip Killers. Together, they are responsible for 6 murders in the early 1980s. Law enforcement believes that there are more victims of their brutal acts still out there, and so does Laura.
Laura's work with Douglas Clark has been a variable cat and mouse game, with Clark professing his innocence, saying it was all Carol Bundy. But during her many conversations with Clark, Laura got him to admit that he was the killer along with Bundy.
Clark recently died on October 11th, 2023, just as Laura was finishing up her study on him. We witnessed one of the sessions with Clark, and it was mesmerizing. It was intense to see this master manipulator at work, trying to bombard Laura with his charismatic personality and serial killer mansplaining.
We will be releasing some of those recorded conversations later, but today we want to talk to Laura to find out how Clark died and what did he say to her before he died. All right, so we have Laura Brand on the phone again, and we have a unusual call with her today because one of the serial killers that she's been doing work with and trying to get answers from over the years just passed away October 11th, which was last week. His name is Douglas Clark. Why don't you tell us a little bit about, first of all, about Douglas Clark and also about your relationship with him and what he told you about the crimes that he committed?
Well, I actually started working with Doug. It was back in 2014. I had met him doing my study on San Quentin's death row. I just seen him last month in September. We had met for a visit and we're going over some legal paperwork, and his death was very unexpected. He had just had surgery. He was getting a stent in his leg. But when I saw him, he had recovered from the surgery and he was doing really well. So it was very shocking. All of a sudden, he just passed away.
Let's talk about who he is, because a lot of people don't really know about the Sunset Strip Killers that happened in the 70s. It's a pretty crazy case, and for a long time, he was claiming that he was wrongfully convicted and that he was innocent. And I really want to kind of dive into the fact that we know that he was not, and you were one of the few people that were able to get that information from him. So yes. Let's start at the beginning. Can you tell me a little bit about the Sunset Strip killings and when it happened and who were some of the victims?
Yeah, so he was active, and what was interesting about his case is he actually had a crime partner, but his crime partner was a female named Carol Bundy. And back in 1980, their prime hunting ground was the Sunset Strip, where they would pick up working girls, some runaways, and they would, get them in the car for sexual purposes and kill them. But then it kind of escalated after that, as there was a lot of necrophilia involved, decapitation. These are pretty grotesque killings.
How many victims were there? other. What I know about is he had first-degree murder with special circumstances on 6 counts, and he had the death penalty.
Yeah.
But how many did you suspect him of?
Well, there's 3 Jane Does that I'm looking into, so that would be on top of the 6. But I want to say they were suspected of over 15.
Okay, let's talk about his partner, Carol Bundy, because it's interesting because there's not that many female serial killers, and most people have never really heard about Carol.
Yes.
Was
So
she-
Carol, from what I know about Carol, she died in the early 2000s, but she had a background where her mother died when she was very young, and her father started a sexual relationship with her. There was a lot of sexual abuse, physical abuse in her childhood. And then she had a pretty normal life after that. She became a nurse, lived in Los Angeles, had a son. But then in her 30s is when she encountered Douglas Clark, and they had met at a bar. It was a Western bar. Where was it? In North Hollywood. And he quickly charmed his way in and moved in with her right after meeting her.
And then how quickly after they met did they start being this, murderous duo?
It was pretty quickly. He moved right in. I think it was like after the first night they'd even met. Doug claimed to me that they had 3 sexual encounters with each other, and then she demanded rent, and he didn't want to pay rent, and he stopped having sex with her. But then I guess after these encounters, they would sit in bed and talk about, paraphilia, that they were kind of into, this kinky sex, the S&M, kind of like the violent type of sex, and just kind of like Bittaker and Norris, it transpired from there, from them just talking about, their interest in this type of violent sex.
And who was their first victim?
It was 2 young girls, high school girls. They were stepsisters, Cindy and Gina, and they were from Orange County, and they had run away up to Los Angeles. And Doug had actually known Cindy. I never really got an answer of how exactly he knew this high school girl prior to them taking these girls. Possibly she'd run away before, but they had gotten them in their car, Cindy and Gina, and their parents.
It was Gina Navarro and Cynthia Chandler.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and they were stepsisters from Orange County.
And Carol and Doug got them into the car, and then what happened?
They were...
Was that particular, those 2 first one, was that the woman Bundy? Was she even in on that? Or I believe it was just Douglas, and he came back and he told her about it.
It was just Douglas, yeah. And he had just told her, and he had... Yes, so this was when he took him to the garage, his storage unit, and he had told Carol Bundy about raping the dead bodies.
Okay, so do we know the timeline? Did he do this while he was with Carol or before?
This is while he was with Carol, yes.
So while he was with Carol, he went out one night, picked up these 2 girls that were high school students, took them back to a storage unit. Did he have this storage unit for a while?
He did have this storage unit for a while. I don't know if the murders took place there, but that was a place he had taken a lot of the bodies for necrophiliac purposes.
All right, so that was his MO. He would like to do that after he killed his victims.
Yeah.
And then he would talk about this with Bundy.
Yes.
And then she decided that she wanted to get involved in this as well, I would assume.
Yes.
So together, what did they do?
Well, this is after these 2 girls. This is when it really all started. They'd start patrolling, and they would go to one of their main stomping grounds was Whiskey A Go Go. They would get, working girls in the car.
Which is on the Sunset Strip in Los Angeles.
Yeah.
Which is actually was a really popular place to go.
It is. I mean, Sunset Strip is still popular today, where a lot of young people go just to hang out, and there's a lot of iconic bars there. And that was pretty much their hunting ground, their trolling ground was these iconic bars right on Sunset Strip.
Yeah, but back in the 80s, it was really exploded.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Right now, it's not, it's still there. It's
not
more
the way
there.
it was in the 80s and the 90s. It was definitely a happening place to be, where a lot of wannabe starlets, wannabe actresses, models, whatever would come to Hollywood. They would go to the Sunset Strip to find, friends and drink and party all night. So they were trolling these bars looking for victims.
Yeah. And, and especially back then too, hitchhiking was a common practice, especially in Los Angeles and California too. So it wasn't abnormal for anybody just to take a ride, especially, coming home from the bar or something like that.
Were they operating at the same time as Norris and Bittaker in Orange County?
Pretty much. I mean, they were just right when Bittaker and Norris were ending, was kind of like where Carol and Doug were starting. It's about 6 months in between the 2.
Wow.
Yeah, but Douglas Clark was actually living, I want to say it was under 10 miles from where Lawrence Bittaker was living at the Scott Motel.
And where was he from originally, Douglas Clark?
He was all over. He was an Army brat, so his parents moved all over, but predominantly he was actually up by San Quentin and San Francisco area.
Okay, so let's talk about when Carol and Clark took their first victim. together, and then what happened from there?
You know, last time I was at San Quentin, I was talking to Doug, and I think you guys heard him talking about this on tape as well. He talks about how they had taken a girl and she was performing oral sex on him, and Carol was in the back seat and she pulled out a gun, a Smith & Wesson, and shot her in the head during this. And when I was talking to Doug at my last trip to San Quentin, he was talking about how even Carol was in the back seat fondling the girl's body too. So there was evidence of both Clark and Carol doing necrophilia to the girls. Another thing that is known in the case is with the decapitation. So
Well,
Clark
hold on. Let's back up for a second. Hold on. Let's not go too deep into that. What I want to kind of talk about right now is how did he get Bundy to kind of so willingly to adopt these killing tendencies? I mean, he obviously had been doing it before. He'd been raping people and killing them and doing horrible things to them. How did he get her on board with the killing spree? Because you said she had a fairly normal life before this, correct?
Well, except for her childhood where there was a lot of sexual abuse and stuff.
But there was there's no killings though. There was nothing she wasn't killing anybody prior to this.
No, that is the $1 million question. People have reported that Clark was very, very charismatic. And if you look at him, still alive on San Quentin's death row, he had so many people convinced of his innocence and trying to help him. So he did have a charisma and a charm, which I think played a huge factor into getting Carol on board with all of this. I think she had, some trauma from the past, from the sexual abuse, from the physical abuse in her own life too.
So they were in a romantic relationship, Carol and Doug.
In the beginning, yeah.
So they're in this romantic relationship, and then he says to her, why don't we go try kill some girls?
Yeah.
And she just goes along with this.
Yeah.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
So they pick up these two girls off of the Sunset Strip, and then what did they do with them? They took them.
Well, Gina and Cindy he did by himself, and then later told Carol about it.
What was her response to that? When because that's obviously the first thing he revealed to her. Did she say anything?
Not that I'm aware of. No, he obviously was able to get her on board with everything. This is pretty typical when you look at serial killers, is they will do something just to gauge the reaction of the person, to see, priming them, just what their reaction is. So it's possible that Carol didn't give much of a reaction, or she gave a curious reaction, possibly like a sexual thrill reaction that Douglas fed off of.
Mm-hmm. And was there any kind of conversation? Because one thing I read about Carol is that after he told her about those first two murders, is that she phoned the police and admitted to having some knowledge of the murders, but refused to any clues to Clark's identity. Did he say anything about that?
Yeah, I don't know if that was after the first ones, but she did start after the killings, phoning the police and saying kind of like, it was very strange, just kind of saying, I know information, but then hanging right up. Yeah. And the police wrote it off as, just prank phone calls.
Okay, so before we get into that...
Hold on one second. There's one other point for that, is that then Clark told her that if they were ever apprehended, he would take the blame and hope that she would be allowed to go free. So maybe that's why she continued to do it. Would that make sense?
What's weird about this, though, is that we're jumping a little ahead, but Carol and him were babysitting an 11-year-old girl within the apartment building who they took sexual pictures of. And Carol actually handed these pictures over to the police, but one of the pictures she handed over was Carol committing a sexual act against the 11-year-old girl herself when she handed them over about Clark.
Got it.
Yeah.
So who was their first victim together?
Yeah, this was June 24th, 1980. Clark killed two sex workers, 24-year-old Karen Lee Jones and 20-year-old Exie LaFaye Wilson. Jones was found that day behind a Burbank, California steakhouse, murdered by a single gunshot wound to the head.
And Carol was involved in these two?
Yes. And the headless body of Wilson had been found by pedestrians. And I know this was when her head was actually found wrapped in a sweatshirt that said Daddy's Girl in a box.
Okay. So then together, how many victims were there? Did they kill together?
Well, the 6 convicted, and then the 3 Jane Does I've been looking into. That would bring it back up to 9, but they're suspected of even more than that.
Do we know anything about the 6 victims besides these 2 that we just said?
There was also, Robert Murray, who was Carol's ex-lover, was another one of their victims as well.
And what's the story behind that?
I guess he had rejected Carol, and she actually committed this murder on her own. She decapitated him. His body was found in his van after, I think it was 7 days, but she had brought the head up into the apartment with Clark and showed it to him. And reportedly, they both laughed about this.
Yeah, I remember the conversation that you had with him that we heard, that we recorded. And where he was talking about it. And he was kind of distancing himself from the killings all the time. Said it was Carol. He just is talking about the head in the bag.
Yeah.
And
I always brought this up to him, why somebody walks in with a human head and you don't call the police, you don't do anything.
And what did he say to you when you said that?
He always said, it was all Carol and he was scared of Carol, trying to say, this decapitation was actually from her obsession with Ted Bundy, because he decapitated a lot of his victims as well.
And what was her story other than Carol Bundy? What was her story as far as after she was convicted? Did she just blame him for everything?
Yeah, this is what you're going to see with the crime partners, what you saw with Bittaker and Norris, and you saw with them too. With Carol and Doug, though, it's a little different because it's very clear. Well, kind of like Bittaker and Norris, you have the Polaroid pictures of them with both committing sexual acts with their victims. They both have the same stories about the necrophilia and the decapitation. Doug had told me in our last meeting together that he had a theory, and it is something I always wanted to look into and listen to. I was trying to get the tapes of Carol's interviews from the police station with LAPD.
Mm-hmm.
She possibly had a dissociative identity disorder, which is very common when a child has a lot of sexual abuse growing up, because he had talked about a little girl's voice, which is another common aspect. And, her calling the cops and then hanging up on the cops, her saying it was him, but then handing over pictures of herself doing this. It is an interesting theory I thought to look into.
So before he met Carol, how many people do you think he killed besides the 2 girls?
2 girls? Gosh, it's hard to tell because, he moved around a lot, even in his young adult life, even aside from being, an Army brat.
Well, then he went into the Air Force after that too. So then he was stationed at a bunch of different places.
That's the problem is, when they're all over the place and in the military, it's you'd have to track down exactly the time frame of where they're stationed, murders in that area that could match up with the ones he was committing in Los Angeles.
So when you sent him the study, did he agree to do it?
He did.
And when he did, what did you come up with? After he completed the study, what were your thoughts?
Well, John is still analyzing it. His handwriting, I had to make him do it actually 3 times because I couldn't understand half of his handwriting. And then he rushed through it. So I had to sit down and have him try to redo it again unrushed. What I will say about knowing Doug for the 10 years I would say he has that evil genius to him. He has that very intellectual side to him, where he reminded me of Bittaker in a sense, where he has a very high IQ. He's good at, but he had more of a charisma than Bittaker had, where he's able to convince pretty much people of everything. But one of his biggest manipulation tactics, I will say, is how he would talk. And you guys got to see this firsthand, is like he would just go and go and go and kind of throw out all this information at you. And you're kind of like, you can't even keep up with what he's telling you. And I think a lot of people go along with that, is like, he seems like he really knows what he's talking about, so you don't question it. But really, it's a manipulation tactic.
Yeah, I know. He just, he loves to own the room.
Yes. Yeah.
And he was screaming about his innocence until all of a sudden he accidentally slipped while he was talking to you, which is the genius behind what you do. And really admitted that he was there, that he was involved, that he actually did do this. Meanwhile, he's on a podcast, talking about his innocence and how he's been wrongfully convicted. So we thought that was quite interesting that he confessed to you.
And he's able to convince these other podcasters that he was innocent because they were professing it.
Yeah, well, I've had 2 podcasters contact me about Doug and saying, he's innocent, but I helped them with proving his innocence. And I said, is that what he's told you? Because with me, it was a different story.
Yeah, he's telling you something different than he's telling the other people.
So tell us a little bit about some of the things that he told you.
Well, the big one was about the girl who was shot in the car with him and Carol. And she remains unidentified to this day. And he had known about some of the work I'd been doing with Bittaker and had asked if I could try to, just identify this girl. And he gave me just everything he could remember about her. She was wearing cowboy boots and a very eclectic outfit. He gave me, what he could remember from height, eye color, skin color, tone, everything, in hopes we could try to identify her.
Why do you think he wanted to do that?
Almost all of them at San Quentin have come to me asking about this. They want their unidentified victims identified. I don't know if this is like a sick thrill for them just to know the identity, or if it's something, deeper, where they just feel like they need to know who it was that they killed.
It's so twisted. It's almost like you have to wonder, is it just because they want your attention, or is it real? How deep did you go with him on this? Do you feel like there is...
Pretty deep. I have the audio recording of us, going over what she looked like. There was tons of conversation about this, and every single time we talked, he would bring her up.
So she's stuck in his mind.
Yeah.
And this is the one that Carol shot?
Yes.
But he was there?
Oh, he was there, yeah.
Yeah, and he helped move the body. Didn't they move the body to Santa Clarita?
Yes.
Let's talk about that. So when he told you the story, what happened after they killed this girl.
Yeah, well, I think it was back in, early 1980. Santa Clarita wasn't really Santa Clarita, right? It was just mainly just the mountains up there.
Yeah, it was rural.
Very isolated. I mean, it would have been a perfect place to bring the bodies, especially if you're, on Sunset or North Hollywood. You would just head north to like this rural terrain to dump the bodies, and that's what they did.
Did he tell you where?
Well, back then it was just mountains, I think, right?
Yeah, it was Newhall,
just a couple
California.
roads.
It was around.
Yeah.
It was discovered August 26th, according to research I have in 1980 in Newhall.
They found that body.
Well, it was actually right near the water treatment plant, right near Magic Mountain.
Yeah.
Which is, you know where that is?
Yeah.
It's right across.
It's not far from.
Yeah. We live pretty close to where that is.
Yeah, it's very close to where we live. But so they found that body.
Yes.
The head.
They found the head.
Yeah. So at least we have DNA sample.
Had they run that at all through a DNA database?
I know they've been trying to, because I know Carl Kopelman from DNA Dope Project. I work with him closely, and we've talked about this victim in particular. They've tried to weed down some possibilities of who she could be, but there's never been a hit on her. When you're in LA, especially in the 80s, everybody's, rushing there to be the next starlet, and you end up on Sunset Strip. And a lot of these missings are from out of state, and the databases don't really. Her family's in Texas, and they list her missing in Texas. She might not necessarily come up in California, especially in LA.
Yeah. And how long was their reign? Douglas, he was obviously, we believe that he was probably murdering before he met Carol Bundy, but when they got together, how long were they together before they were caught?
It wasn't too long. It was very similar to Bittaker and Norris. It was like 9 months to a year, but that was Carol with Doug.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying.
How many people did they kill together?
It was the 6 convicted, and then the 3 does we know of.
So the 6.
So that would be.
So 6 victims. All those bodies have been found.
Yes.
And the 3. There's just 3 bodies of Jane Does that they found, or they haven't even found them.
No, we have the Does. They're not, they were never convicted for them. But if you go on their, name is site or Jane Doe, it'll say, suspected Douglas Clark and Carol Bundy.
And that was because they didn't have any evidence to tie them to?
Correct, yeah.
But you believe that those are 3 that he's connected to?
Well, he's asking about them.
Yeah.
That's how you know. He asked her, he said, he wants her to find out who these Jane Does are.
Yeah.
So there you go. But, ironically, he won't admit to it, but he wants to find out.
Right.
That was the interesting thing when we witnessed you conversing with him on Zoom that time.
Yes.
That he would give you information but would quickly distance himself from it.
Yes. It's like they put out the carrot and then they quickly kind of hide.
Yeah. I mean, I think, before, anybody, that term word salad that comes up every once in a while, he seems like he was the master at the word salad, because he would say a lot of stuff, but really nothing, you get like 1 or 2 words out of him that this head and bag. I carried the head, and then he would go off on this other.
And then he would say, "Oh no, I didn't carry the head. What are you talking about?" I mean, complete gaslighting.
Yes. He's one of those serial killers. You have to know, keep a list of, all the witnesses right in front of you. So when he starts just spewing out the words, you know how to go right back at him. At the end of the one we taped with Doug, and he mentioned the girl who identified his voice. There was a witness who came back and who identified his voice. I forget what I said exactly, but I came back and I said, well, how did she know your voice, or how did she know that detail? And he went into that word scramble once again.
Yeah. Well, he has a very distinctive voice. He has almost like a broadcast voice. He's very, very deep tone.
But he is very charismatic. That's the thing. He's very similar to like a Ted Bundy, or, one of these types of people that has this charisma about them that people would find attractive, who would listen to him and believe him. But I mean, unless you'd have to dig a little bit. So let's talk about the first time that you met him. What was that like? Because he's terrifying to me. Watching him on the thing, he gave me he has the worst energy, and he did such horrific things. I mean, I can't even imagine what you felt when you were walking in there to meet this guy.
Yeah, and it was wild too, because I had just sat down with Lawrence Bittaker, and he said, "Are you meeting with Douglas Clark next?" Because they were very close at San Quentin. And I said, "Yes." And he goes, he likes to talk about pony girls. And I said, "What's a pony girl?" And he said, "It's when you chop off the limbs from the knees and the elbows, and the girl has to walk on all 4s, on those limbs." And I was like, oh my God. And it was right after that, I had to get in a cage and conduct the interview with him.
So that's what Lawrence kind of teed you up with him?
Yeah, that was the tee up.
Oh my God.
Cage. Uh-huh.
I think it's ironic that they were both fairly active at the same time, living close by, and then they were cellmates, or they were like right in the same death row, and they became friends. It's really bizarre.
It is bizarre.
It's very bizarre. And Doug had told me he actually knew the Hillside Stranglers when he was out.
It's really interesting that in Southern California in the 70s and the early 80s, there were so many serial killers operating in the same area.
It is. I mean, it's really wild because they were really on top of each other.
Yeah.
I mean, Doug knew the Hillside Stranglers. When I was looking into Bittaker Norris's case, I had to look up, I was looking at one of their victims from Knott's Berry Farm, and I came across a Calla was the same month killing somebody at Knott's Berry Farm. So it was like I had to cross-reference all these different serial killers, for their hunting locations.
So when you saw him for the first time and you sat down with him, what were your first impressions?
Well, charismatic, a good talker. The same thing, the word scramble. I think you noticed that right off the bat. I would say narcissistic because the first time we sat down, I was 8 months pregnant, and he didn't know until I stood up to leave that I was big too. And he had no idea while we were sitting there. And then when they came around to take a picture of us, he was the first killer that ever pushed me out of the way because he wanted to take a picture of just by himself posing.
Interesting.
Wow.
Yeah.
So in your conversations, I mean, independent of the one that we witnessed, did he say, I'm sure all these guys gave you their background and, based just the cursory research that we did on his background, I mean, he seemed like he came from a fairly decent family. Did he have almost, he went to exclusive international school in Geneva.
Yes.
And then attended a military academy. And
he did.
So did he ever tell you any about his experience as a child and to kind of give you a background?
Just like you were saying, it was very prestigious, and he had a 2-parent household. They moved around a lot. Even up until the day he died, he was close with his brother. He remained close with everybody. And he even said to me, I think this was last month, he said, "My mother thanks you." This isn't your typical serial killer background where you're going to see abuse or sexual abuse, physical abuse, or drugs and alcohol in the household. His was the complete opposite.
What do you think caused him to do the things that he did? I mean, these are horrific things that he did. It wasn't just like, he killed someone. No, he killed them. He decapitated them. He was a necrophiliac, which I think is the most horrific thing you can think of. And he chose young victims. Is there any pattern here? Is there any psychological drawing you can give us of why someone would do these things coming from the background that he came from? Like, is he just genetically evil, or is it something else?
Definitely say there's a genetic component to this for sure with that kind of background. In our last interview, he did divulge something that he never said before. As a kid, when he lived up by San Francisco, he said he remembers them shooting the whales in the head, and he got teary-eyed about it, and I thought he was almost doing it to copy Lawrence Bittaker because he had just seen the documentary where Bittaker cried, and I had wondered if that was why he was doing these kind of crocodile tears, but I thought it was pretty relevant to mark down on my interview notes about the whales getting shot in the head, because that was exactly what happened to his victims.
So that was why he did what he did, because he was traumatized by seeing people shoot whales in the head. So he decided
he didn't say that, but I marked it down as a possibility.
For what he was trying to manipulate you, I believe. I don't. After seeing him in action and feeling him, his energy while he was talking to you, I just feel that he was pure evil. I don't.
Yeah. The one thing he used to do at San Quentin, I had another inmate down when I was visiting with him this last session, and I had said, "Can you please watch the interview? And I want you to tell me how different he is with me opposed to when he goes back up into the prison, into his cell." So I had somebody watching the interview. Douglas always pretended he was sick in a wheelchair, like he'd have the guards, having to push him around in the wheelchair and pretend to be ill. And he had an eye patch. Now, before I had walked into the visiting room where the cages are, apparently he had taken off the eye patch to look around the room to see where I was. So his eyesight was fine.
Well, yeah, we saw that happened to us during the video that we saw when we were watching him, and his eye patch kept on flipping up, and I'm like, I thought he may have had a fake eye or something like that, or got,
I think he just faked a lot of illnesses just to feel that power of the guards pushing him around and like he needs help. And I think we see that with the serial killers. If you look at, the Golden State Killer, when he was doing the push-ups in his cell, but feigning like he has no idea where he is, at the trial.
BTK did that too. He's recently
Yeah.
been copping to that, and so did Green River Killer. When we were there, he was like constantly feigning illness.
Maybe to evoke some sort of pity.
Well, I always say these guys are predators, so they might be faking an illness. They might be looking like very frail and weak, but they're ready to pounce. And I think they use that just to draw people in, to put their guard down, even in their old age.
Yeah, and also to make themselves less threatening to the staff and the inmates. This way,
Right.
why would they bother him?
Right.
Did you ever feel like he could turn around and just kill you while you were in there?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
He has.
I think, you do one wrong move or you say one wrong thing, I think, they can switch like at the drop of a hat.
How do you process that? Because I've done a lot of interviews with inmates and killers behind bars, and I'm usually surrounded by a couple other correctional officers and a camera crew, and even though I'm like right there and I'm standing in front of them, you're in the cage alone with them. I mean,
Right.
how long would it take a correctional officer to get to you if he had done something?
Well, what most people don't know about this is that, let's say one of them did turn and go for my neck or try to strangle me or attack me in the cage. The correctional officers on the outside can come to the cage, but they cannot open the door because they cannot open the cage with the death row inmate uncuffed. So the most they can do is spray in mace to the cage to try to get him off of me by mace until somebody would have to call up. The correctional officers would have to put on the padding and then come down.
Yeah, an extraction team.
And then even when they come down, they have to make the decision whether or not it's safe enough to even open the cage, even if he's attacking you.
I know.
With him uncuffed. So
There's that awful thing that you have to sign before you go in these prisons where they say if you do get captured in a riot that they're not going to negotiate for your life.
Correct. So if anything does happen to you, those forms, you really sign your life away, essentially.
So while you're in there with him, was there ever a moment where you thought he could kill me right now if he...
I mean, I always think that with every single one I sit down with, and I always watch, the shoulders and the way they move their feet, like how if they're on the heels of their feet, I always watch for that because they can just pounce up from that. Their shoulders, how they're leaned in or leaned back. I'm just always watching the full body and what position they're in, if they can just lunge.
Fortunately for you, a lot of Douglas was, he did seem kind of rickety, and so did Lawrence. So that's...
I still wouldn't trust them.
I know, but still.
I don't. I mean, she's tiny. Laura's tiny.
I know.
But the thing is, with Doug, you've been working with him for almost a decade. What psychological profile can you tell us about him, or what is your overall impressions of him as a case study?
As a case study, he was, ironically, I would probably say he was very Bundy-esque in the fact that he had that charm and that charisma, and he thought he had everybody around him fooled. And he really got off on that. And I think he got off on, the psychological games, just within the prison and pretending to be ill and sick and getting off that he was getting people and, to do podcasts and do shows and stuff that show that he was innocent. And I think he really believed in the end, like he was going to just walk out one day and prove his innocence to everybody. And it would just be his final laugh to the world.
And so how would you even, what kind of mental illness would you call that? Or what kind of, psychological,
I wouldn't even,
what
I
is
would say
that?
Personality, that's like psychopathy. That is,
I was going to say psychopathy, definitely.
Psychopathy, it's not mental illness. This is a personality disorder. That is psychopathy,
So psychopathy is what the theme is with all of these killers that you've been dealing with. These are psychopaths.
Typically the ones I do deal with are psychopaths, but there's not every serial killer is a psychopath. There are some that do have mental illness. If you're looking at like Richard Chase, who had schizophrenia, there's some that are mentally ill, but the ones that I'm typically dealing with are the ones that are suffering from psychopathy.
So the thing, people like him, Bittaker, BTK, Green River Killer, Ted Bundy, highly functioning people.
Right.
To be able to turn on and turn off and
Correct.
Blend back into society, because all these guys had, they all had jobs. They all went and did jobs.
What did he do, Douglas Clark? What was his profession?
He had a good job. He was an engineer.
Yeah, it says here he worked for the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Interesting that he dumped one of the bodies at the Water and Power in Santa Clarita.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's very similar to BT. Well, that's like BTK. Didn't he do?
Well, he worked for the city.
Well, he also worked for the security
Well, he worked for ADT first before he got a job working for the city as a compliance officer.
So, Laura, what do you think of that? Someone who's highly functioning in society, working as an engineer for the water department of Los Angeles, who on his down days is out decapitating prostitutes.
Yeah, when Bittaker was dying, I said to him, I go, did you ever just want to have a normal life? Like, get married, have kids, or just a normal life? And he said, yeah, of course. And he looked at me like I was crazy. And I said, don't look at me like I'm crazy. That's not the route you took in life. And I've even asked Doug that question. I think in our final one, I said, did you ever just want that normal life? And they all say, yeah. And it's like, so there's this need, this compulsion they have for this violence within them too. And that doesn't necessarily mean all psychopaths are violent. The majority aren't. So there's also this compulsion need for this killing inside of them as well.
Interesting. Just looking at the victims here, do you think Douglas would have killed a man if he wasn't with Carol?
Would Clark have killed a man?
So
that was her ex-boyfriend, though, Carol.
Yes.
Got it. That makes sense then.
Yeah, like his victim of choice was the young girls.
Yeah.
But I could see him killing a man if he threatened, maybe he saw something or threatened his, exposing him. I could see Doug definitely killing a man.
But as far as just looking for a target, it's usually...
As far as looking for a target, no. I would say he would have stuck to the young girls. That was his preferred choice.
So what was the evidence that was used to convict him? Do you know?
Yeah, so that storage unit that he had, there was blood. The victim's blood was found in that storage unit. Gun that was used against one of the victims was found actually where he worked, in a storage box of his.
So when he's claiming his innocence, what exactly is he saying?
He's tried to say that blood in the storage was fake, that actually wasn't blood, it was gasoline, and the forensics messed up. And that's a big one, is they'll always go after like the forensic examiners. There was a big mix up there, and it's not what they thought it was. Bill Suff, who we also spoke with, he said the blood in his van was Dr. Pepper. But Doug said it was gasoline, the blood found in the storage unit.
And what did the forensics say?
It was blood. It was the victim's blood. Yeah. And as for the gun, he tried to say that Carol had planted it at his workplace.
Let's talk a little bit about that when they were apprehended and how they tell us a little bit about that. And, how did they turn on each other? What was the result of that?
It was very weird because, Carol had been doing those phone calls, and then she had sent the pictures in of these sexual acts against the 11-year-old, but one with herself. And I know they interviewed Carol extensively on tape about what had happened. So it was pretty much, she was kind of like the Roy Norris. Everything was taped, and that was used as the evidence of it, crime partner versus crime partner against each other.
So they just basically turned on each other.
Yeah.
But she was arrested first?
Yes. Well, she pretty much turned herself in with the pictures and the calls.
Got it.
Because she kept calling.
Yeah,
she called the police like multiple times.
Multiple times, yeah.
And kept saying she had information about him, but wouldn't tell them who it was.
Yeah, and they kept thinking it was prank phone calls, and then finally they kept saying to her, like, what's your name or something, and I think at one of the last phone calls, they got her name out of her.
Have you spoken to any of the law enforcement who dealt with them?
No, I would love to.
Yeah, me too.
Especially, it would be very interesting to speak to one of them. Doug was trying to get me the tapes of Carol in those first interrogations, which I really wanted to hear. Yeah,
oh, okay.
I would have interviewed her the second if she was still alive, just to compare what they both were saying.
Do you think from your communications with him and your interviewing of him for almost a decade that there's more victims out there that have not been identified or found?
Yeah, because this type of stuff doesn't just spring out of nowhere, and especially with her as a submissive crime partner, just like with Bittaker, it's usually them starting off and bringing somebody on to heighten the thrill with them.
So before he met her, how long was it before he met her that he killed those two girls?
It was very shortly after they had met. Gina.
He claims those are the first two that he ever killed, those two girls.
According to what I have here, they met at a bar on Christmas, a country bar. Is that
the Western.
It was in
the Western
Studio City was where it was.
Yeah, I'm curious what the name it was, because there weren't that many country Western bars back then. I wonder if it was the Palomino. Yeah, that's where they met, according to this research.
Yeah, it was that night they went home together.
So they went home together on Christmas, 1980? 1979.
Yeah, 1979.
Christmas 1979, because I remember it was the late 70s that this started. So they meet at a bar on Christmas 1979. Was he estranged from his family at that time, or did he have a relationship with his family?
He had a relationship, I mean, the whole time, his whole life. I don't recall any times he's ever told me there was any type of estrangement from his family.
When he met Carol and they started having a romantic relationship, did he love her? Did they have like a real relationship?
No, he had told me like it was just for sex and just to have a place to stay. He was almost a Tinder swindler of the 80s.
Well.
Yeah, like he would hop from girls' places to girls' places. He was that charismatic and kind of charming.
So he didn't have to pay rent, so he would just bounce around.
Yeah.
And then how old was he when he met her?
They were in their 30s.
And she had 2 kids too, didn't she?
He did, yeah.
Have you ever tried contacting the 2 children? Or 2
No,
people?
I don't know how much they would know back then, because I think they weren't even in the house when he was around that much.
Mm-hmm.
But it would be just to see if they do remember anything from Doug at the place or with Carol or anything.
So let's look at the timeline for a second. So they meet on Christmas. Then when are the 2 girls murdered?
The first 2 girls here.
That was January 26th.
So a month later,
Yeah.
he kills these 2 girls and he tells her about it to see her reaction, which leads me to believe that this is not the first time he's killed anyone. Plus the fact that why would you kill 2 people if it was your first time killing someone? So obviously he's killed other people and that's what I'm wondering is did he ever give you any inclination about victims that were before Carol?
No. In our last interview, this was last month, he was talking about, and I did mark it down, he was talking about some girls, young girls that were killed up in the San Francisco area, and I had made a note to look into those.
Do you know where in San Francisco? Was it in the city or was it in one of the counties?
I think he said they were being dumped near like San Rafael County, which is where San Quentin is.
In Marin County.
Marin County, yes. So I made a note to look into that because I thought it was very peculiar that he would bring that up just randomly all of a sudden.
And what exactly did he say?
Not many details, just talking about how there was other girls dying up in this area, like Northern California.
Can we just go back real quick? I just want to make sure we get the timeline right because the first murders you said of Gina and Cynthia, they vanished in mid-June, June 11, 1980. The one that the January 26, 1980, the riverbed is when they found the Valencia Jane Doe.
Oh yes, that's the Jane Doe, 26, 1980.
Yeah, that was the
Magic
first.
Mountain Parkway.
Yes, that's the one they found in the sewage treatment plant.
Okay, so let's do this again. So Carol and Doug meet on Christmas, 1979. January 20th.
January 26th.
Sorry.
Yeah.
January 26, 1980, an unidentified victim is found near the water sewage plant
on the old road.
On the old road in Santa Clarita, which is about 25 miles north of Hollywood.
Yeah.
And this is an unidentified body found there, and Doug happens to work as an engineer for the Los Angeles County of Water.
Yeah.
So that Jane Doe is found, but it's not linked to him at this point.
Right.
And he doesn't tell Carol? Did he tell Carol about this?
No idea.
And then, just to get the timeline down, then on June 30th, 1980, a group of snake hunters off the Golden State Freeway near Sylmar in San Fernando Valley, which is not too far. It's like probably 5-10 minutes away from where the treatment plant is, discovered a woman's mummified corpse identified as a 17-year-old Sacramento runaway, Marnette Carey Comer. Mm-hmm. And I guess she was the young prostitute who had been dead at least 3 weeks when she was found. So these are all before he met Carol. Or no, just after he met Carol.
Right, yeah, right after. Mm-hmm.
But there's no solid evidence that tied these two Jane Does to him, or yes?
It's just suspected, but it's never been tied to him.
Okay. So they weren't part of the case.
Right. Right.
Got it. And he's never talked about these because he's constantly claiming his innocence?
Yeah, he's been claiming his innocence about everything. But yeah, same with
What did Bittaker
two.
say about that? Did he ever kind of like, because Bittaker was like, he was pretty forthright with what he did, correct?
Yes, and he had told me that Doug had talked to him about these Jane Does a lot.
Oh, so there you go. Because he wants to brag.
He wanted to brag. Yeah, so on the prison yard, they're bragging.
Got it. So he basically admitted to Bittaker that he did it.
Yes.
That's crazy.
Bittaker even used to say to me, he's like, I'm sick, but he's even sicker.
Wow.
Yeah.
There you go. That's
Yeah.
crazy.
For a serial killer to say that, it says a lot.
What do you think you would have learned from Carol Bundy if you had gotten a
Probably
chance?
lot. It sounded like she was willing to talk, and it sounds like her and Doug had a very macabre relationship. I don't even know how you would describe theirs. It's very chilling. So I think I would have learned a lot from Carol.
Do you think Doug would have eventually killed Carol?
Yes. I think if he had even found out about the phone calls and about what was going on, I think, she would have been done for.
So he was born in 1948, the third son of 5 children, to a retired naval admiral.
Yeah.
His father was a naval intelligence officer. Did he ever talk about his family?
He did. He talked about his father. Yeah.
What did he say?
He would just brag about his dad,
I mean, he seems like he had a charmed life. I mean, he lived in India, Switzerland, the Marshall Islands.
Oh, yeah.
And his father was also an engineer.
Yeah.
He was sent to an exclusive international school of Geneva and then also the military academy.
Yeah, we were talking about that earlier.
Oh, my
He
God.
had his
So
pilot's license.
did he
Even,
ever
one of his,
Go ahead.
I was going to say one of his hobbies was just flying as recreational use. Very charmed life.
So apparently he was recording his sexual encounters with girls in high school. Did he ever talk about that?
No. He talked about the Polaroids. He was very into taking pictures.
So this whole thing with necrophilia, I mean, when you did the study with him, did that come up as one of the archetypes?
No. I mean, John is still analyzing it, but there's only been a few where that has popped up, and I didn't expect it to pop up with Doug because he had tried to hide that aspect. Necrophilia is the one thing with the serial killers that they always have a hard time talking about or they'll shy away from. It takes a lot to get them to get into the details of that. It's almost shameful. It's like the one aspect that's shameful to them.
Yeah, Gary Ridgway was the same way, I think.
Yeah. The only one who's ever really gotten into it with me is Wayne Adam Ford, who's, spoken very frankly about it.
Well, he was unique because he actually turned himself in, which is unusual for a serial killer.
Right.
And we'll be talking about him as well. But so now that he's dead, what can be done as far as trying to find these other victims?
Well, he named me power of attorney, and plan was, which we're still working on, is to, get the police discovery, the court transcripts, these tapes of Carol Bundy, and hopefully the DNA of these Jane Does.
So you were able to get the power of attorney before he passed?
Yes, notarized everything.
Wow.
That's great.
It was down to a week before. We were so lucky.
So the power of attorney, what does that entail for you? What does that mean?
Just pretty much everything on his case. So I'm like his acting attorney, so I have control of everything on his case, which means evidence, the sealed police files, the court transcripts, Carol's tapes, the DNA of the does, pretty much everything.
So you'll have access to the Carol tapes?
Yes.
Yeah, see, I mean, Carol Bundy gave a full confession.
Yeah, I think it was over a span of a few days, too.
Mm-hmm.
She went into a lot of details, yeah.
Wow, he did a lot of murders by water towers, I guess because he had access to them.
Well, he was around them.
It's interesting that you said he reminds you of Ted Bundy. Can you elaborate just a little bit on that? When you were sitting with him, what kind of thoughts, what was your overall perspective on?
Just the charisma, especially, and just how he was able to kind of trance everybody around him into believing him. It was just the way he spoke that way, and the way he pretended he was ill, and then I would get in the cage with him, and he'd be healthy as an ox.
Yeah, he didn't seem, even though he had the stupid eye patch on and this weird cowboy hat on, straw cowboy hat. I mean, he was pretty energetic.
Mm-hmm.
He was, and eccentric like Bundy as well.
Yeah.
So overall, what did you learn from him? I mean, what all this work that you've done with him? How could you sum it up for us?
All the work, God. I feel like there's still so much work to even do with his case.
And talk about that too. Like, what do you hope to do with this now that he's passed?
Now that I have, I do have the audio tapes of him talking about the unidentified, and now being the power of attorney, getting the case files, looking into identifying these girls like once and for all, having more power to be able to do so, to get the DNA from his case and actually privately test it to get them identified, going over, his police files and Carol's tapes and seeing if there's something maybe that has been missed this whole time of what led to these horrific crimes.
When do you have access to that stuff?
When do I?
Did you get all access to that stuff already?
Yes. So the power of attorney, the forms that we had, gave me like the full control to everything on the case.
Okay.
Like I had an attorney draw it up specifically for Doug's case.
Great. So do you have that stuff physically yet?
Not yet. Right now we're working on getting just his the property from San Quentin out of his cell.
Got it. Like what did he have in his cell?
We have no idea.
Got it.
He did keep a lot of his case files on person in his cell, so there will be some of that stuff in there.
And then what about the tapes? Were they his old attorney?
Yes.
Got it.
It's almost going to be like a scavenger hunt to like get every piece that we have to.
Got it.
Yeah.
Do you think that Carol was influenced completely by him, or she would have done this on her own? Do you think he had that ability to just turn?
I think he led her. I do think he led her and charmed her in a way, but the fact that she killed Jack by decapitation on her own really speaks to her violent nature too. So I don't think she was just, swindled into this killing with him. I think there was violent tendencies maybe hidden within herself. I just can't see a woman all of a sudden just decapitating a man. And then the pictures with the 11-year-old girl doing these, depraved sexual acts on 11-year-olds too. I mean, it was a participant in them is what the pictures depict.
Mm-hmm. And what was the purpose for the decapitation? Were they trying to get rid of the body and they didn't want to be able to identify the body?
Well, Douglas Clark was having sex with the decapitated heads.
Oh, sorry I asked.
Yeah.
It's
sorry I asked. Because
so
I thought it was...
much, I would say.
Yeah.
No, it was for sexual purposes. They found his semen in the decapitated head.
Oh, my God.
Yeah. That's how we know they were used for sexual purposes.
Oh, my God. Poor people.
Mm-hmm. I think also one of the things that bothers me about this case and this killer is that a lot of his victims were living on the fringe, so to speak. They were prostitutes or into drugs, or they just runaways, or they just weren't the normal, all-American girl that we always see broadcast when they're missing. And I feel like it's the same with Gary Ridgway. It was the same thing. It was like these girls that live on the fringe and that no one would miss them. Did he ever talk about the victims, why he chose the ones that he chose? Because to me, that's the most frightening part. It's like you're walking down the street. Is someone watching you walk down the street? Are they just going to take you? I mean, how did he choose these people? Was it just convenience?
Just like you said, convenience on, victims of opportunity living on the fringe. And, they're almost easy prey for these types of predators because they'll get into the car and they'll do anything for money sometimes. And it's just an easy way for them just to procure a victim, to get one inside of the vehicle where they'll go off and anywhere with them pretty much. And that's what, Doug was doing. That's what he was hunting for. And, that's where he was finding them, on the Sunset Strip.
And then what's going to be really interesting is when you get to dive into those Carol Bundy tapes.
Yeah.
What else you're going to learn.
Right.
Because no one's ever heard those before other than the legal officials, correct?
Correct.
Because they weren't played during trial, were they?
I don't believe so.
Okay, because they probably didn't have to. They probably just had transcripts of them.
Yeah.
It'd be interesting to hear from the voice of how she probably described and threw him under the bus, but at the same time exposed herself. Do you think that Douglas, if he had never met Carol Bundy, do you think he would have been caught the way he was?
Probably not. And I said that about Lawrence Whitaker, too. It was like they both took crime partners to heighten the thrill, I think. And it ended up being both of their downfalls, but I think they would have, continued a very long career.
I don't know how you keep that secret. It's like how do you put that much trust in someone that you become a serial killer couple? Unless,
right.
But it happens. It happens. There was the, Jen Carson's parents, her father and her stepmother.
The San Francisco witch killer.
Yeah. Same thing. But this is all fascinating. This is all great. I'm really, the main reason we wanted to talk about this, obviously, because Douglas just died. Now, hopefully we'll be able to get more answers, because he wasn't giving you a whole lot of answers. He was just I think you'll probably get more answers going through all his stuff.
Yeah. And, it was the same with Whitaker. Once you get the, case files and discovery, that's when it kind of is like Pandora's box. That's when it really blows up. And you're seeing it, all the evidence gathered and everything.
Yeah, because that's how you found Dina Moody, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
All the teenagers,
which we're talking to, who we talked to also on the podcast, which we're going to be here from too. So it's going to be, and all those other family members who are near misses, people that were potential targets that for one reason or another got away or didn't get killed. That's the scariest, and you have to think about that. If you find out years after the fact that you were a potential target for a serial killer.
Right.
That's got to do a number on you.
Have you talked to any of the victims or potential victims of Douglas Clark? Were there any? Did you have any of those experiences with him?
I haven't got the case files yet, but I'm sure once I start, digging into the case from the sealed police files, it's going to be just like Whitaker. I'm going to have a name like a ton of teenage girls, just like Dina Moody, who we talked with, that I'm going to have to, track down and interview. And that's when usually I learn a lot more information is Because, you know, teenagers at the time, they get very scared, you know, they're getting questioned by police and they don't want to say anything. And then when you track them down 40 years later, they're ready to tell pretty much the whole truth of what happened back then.
I think it's interesting, though. I mean, Bittaker knew he was dying, and he wanted to talk to you quickly before he died to give you the location of missing victims, because I feel like he might have wanted to kind of redeem or some kind of redemption, or he was afraid to die, it seemed like.
Yeah.
He knows where he's going.
Right.
You know,
Right.
he, like,
Yeah, I know, but Douglas Clark was so in denial about himself. Like you said,
Yeah.
like he literally thought he was just, because he lived such a charmed existence up until he got caught. Because you know he was doing this before he met Carol. I don't believe that was the first time.
That could be, you know, a component into this too. You know, he had such a charmed life and he really did believe he was going to be able to con everyone around him.
he was above it
into
all.
believing. Yes. Yes.
That's all we have for now.
Yeah, I mean,
I think I think there's going to be a lot more that you're going to find that we can talk about, and hopefully
Yeah.
find some new people to talk to, and
Right.
hopefully help with some of these Jane Does. I mean, that's the one thing our audience needs to know, is the reason why she's doing this is for the families of the victims and the Jane Does, to try to bring them home, and the fact that she's now able to get all this information from the horse's mouth that no one's ever seen before is going to be really rich with information that hopefully can kind of close the door on some of these victims' families, so they can have some sort of closure and also have some more information about what happened to them.
because there's
Right.
3 Jane Does that you're looking into right now.
Yes. And, you know, once we start digging into the police files, we could have a ton more, you know. You never know what you're going to find. And it starts just by talking with them and doing my interviews. But, you know, even after death, you know, I have a ton of work to still do on these cases.
And I guess some of the questions that maybe the audience might have about this is, why didn't the police identify those Jane Does?
Well, they have been trying. They have ruled out some people. There is a list of missings that have been ruled out for them, but
what we do know is that they were taking swabs for DNA back then, but they didn't have the capability to actually identify DNA until 2001.
So through your research, so Laura is going to take this discovery now that Douglas Clark has given her the power of attorney for, and she's going to dive into thousands of pages of police reports and analysis and research to try to find any clues to who these Jane Does are that maybe was missed. Maybe it was missed by law enforcement because it was 40 years ago.
you have to redo the whole investigation from what I did with, at least with Bittaker, is I took the police discovery and then I made a list of all the witnesses, which was over 250 people. And I tracked down each and every single one, re-interviewing everybody and just doing the investigation from the bottom up myself.
Because unfortunately, a lot of these girls that went missing, you know, especially in the late 70s and early 80s, if they were involved, if they were sex workers or if they were involved in drugs, they just weren't given a lot of thought to. And we saw that with Gary Ridgway as well. A lot of his victims, because they were prostitutes, were just kind of brushed aside. So the fact that you're going to now go back and dig through this is incredible. And hopefully we get some answers for these families, for these 3 Jane Does who, they were human lives and they deserve to have proper burials and to be remembered for being young girls.
And,
innocents.
you know,
they are innocents.
Exactly.
Their lives
and they could have siblings and family members that are still out there looking for them.
Yeah, I mean, when you killed them at the prime teenage year, 15 and 16, I mean, in 1980, that's how old I was. I mean, it's like they would be my age right now if they would have a full life.
And what's also scary is that he was into pedophilia. So you don't even know if there were children that he had taken.
Yeah, it's very true. I mean, we have the evidence of the one girl who was 11, but could there be other children around that age even?
I mean, 15, 16, they're children too.
And it's so important the work you're doing because, as we know, it's like, even though they say the golden age of serial killers was like in the 70s and 80s, we are getting into the point where there's still a lot of crazy people out there. Serial killer people keeping people chained in their basements. I read articles about all them. Gilgo Beach murder serial killer. Yeah. He was just apprehended. Mm-hmm. They believe that he is the guy. And so it's like that guy operated literally rent-free for how many years before he caught? And he was like, there was all these other people that knew he was weird. His neighbors knew he was weird. All these things. I mean, I know sometimes you have a weird neighbor, but still, there was a lot of people who were pointing the finger at him. And I think a lot of the reason why he probably wasn't picked up is because of there was a lot of corruption in the Suffolk County Police Department for about a good 20 years. And that's right, because when a new administration came in, they were only in the administration for a short period of time, and they found him. Yeah. So I guess there was enough evidence that just wasn't there.
But as far as Doug Clark is concerned, do you think he would have gotten caught had it not been for Carol?
I don't know, because it seems like he does have that intelligence level. And if he was doing this before her, then we have no idea. So if he was doing this before her, then I would think he would have kept on going and getting away with it.
Yeah.
If it hadn't been for her.
And then one last thing, and then we'll wrap this up. But for 9 years you were working with him, what did you uncover? Like, what was the biggest thing that you uncovered from him that you feel like, because you put a lot of effort into this, you talked to these people.
Right. The number one thing is the guilt. Like, finally, after all these years of him, like, professing his innocence to anybody who would listen on any podcast that would, take him on. That was a big one. Him admitting to finally being guilty was the biggest.
And that's huge, because he's so narcissistic and just refused to acknowledge that he did these things.
Yeah.
Yeah, when we were on the phone with him, when you were on that call with him, I mean, it kept on like saying it was Carol.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was there, but Carol, she handed me this bag with a head in it. What am I going to do with it?
Right.
Right. Well, we know what he did with it. So it's like he was not innocent by no means.
Yeah.
All right. Well, this has been fantastic and fascinating, and we can't wait to get to hopefully get a hold of those files and tapes. I mean, I think there's going to be a treasure trove of information for you to study and analyze and hopefully find some of these missing Jane Does.
Yeah. A lot more work ahead. But...
Yeah. Great. Thanks, Laura. We'll talk to you soon.
Yeah. All right. Talk to you guys.
All right,
Bye.
Next time on Partners in True Crime.
On this season of Partners in True Crime, The Serial Killer Whisperer, we will be following Laura Brand's incredible journey as she continues her groundbreaking study on serial killers.
Each week, we will release never-before-heard recordings of her conversations with the most notorious killers in hopes to get answers for the victims' families, and maybe that could lead to recovering their lost remains.
Please visit our website where you can subscribe to the podcast, find show notes, and check out extra content from all of our podcasts. All rights reserved. This has been a production of 722 Media Content.